What's going on, friends? Harley-Davidson traditionally kept the things in the engines that worked and, well, eventually got rid of the things that didn't work. Now, if you've gotten familiar with the later model engines, you're probably very well aware that, well, a lot of the things that worked are no longer present in these engines. But guys, when it comes to the Harley-Davidson's Panhead engine, this engine left a legacy that is really still present in some ways in today's modern engines. The Panhead introduced the Harley-Davidson buying public to aluminum cylinder heads. Now, aluminum cylinder heads were a huge innovation because, well, they basically transferred heat about 3 times better than the good old cast iron. Now, the cool thing about the Panhead's aluminum cylinder heads is that these cylinder heads were actually cast out of the same type of aluminum, basically the metal alloy that was used on the fighter planes of the era back in World War II. Now, I know that may not be a big thing today, but still pretty cool when it comes to Harley-Davidson and kind of keeping that tie to the World War II era. So basically, you could say that the Panhead engine had technology that was derived from combat aircraft. Now, while the Panhead engine had some really trick aluminum heads for the era, it still retained the good old cast iron barrels. Now, cast iron does not exactly dissipate heat quite as well as aluminum, so basically with those cylinders and the small fins, you're pretty much riding a waffle iron. Guys, please don't forget, if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. So guys, the defining feature of the Panhead engine was obviously that giant one-piece valve cover on top that looked like basically a cake pan or any other pan thereof. Well, the reason why Harley-Davidson did that was they were really trying to make these engines oil tight and get them to quit leaking oil from the top end. And if you ever owned a Panhead, rode a Panhead, or just been around a Panhead, you know that didn't really solve the problem. They still marked their territory. So guys, we've always talked about Harley-Davidson engines being very simple, easy to work on machines. Now, in the era of the Panhead, to actually try to quiet down some of the valve train noise, they actually put what was essentially a piece of a felt blanket in there on top of that rocker gear cover. Yes, a piece of felt just to try to dampen the sound down of the valve train noise a little bit. And not only that, I guess the thought behind that was to soak up some oil and also provide some, basically an oil drip, I guess, for the rocker arms, because you got a piece of felt up there, it's soaked with oil, it's dampening noise, which obviously being soaked oil is going to help do that. And at the same time, I guess it kind of did double duty by leaking oil down onto the rocker arms, because that's pretty much the primitive way that the Panhead was oiled. But hey, it worked. So originally on the knucklehead, the rockers actually rotated on stationary shafts. But when it came to the Panhead, they kind of updated that a little bit, I guess you could say. Maybe it's been a little more complicated. But they put them on bolted together trunnions for the rocker arms to pivot. So oil return on these engines from the top end was just about as basic as you could get. They had drillings in the cylinder where it pretty much ran down the cylinders to the mating surface on the cases and ran back into the crankcase. And not only that, you pretty much got some oil that was returned through the pushrod tubes back down to the crankcase. Nothing super fancy here. That's what made these engines so great. Now, Harley over the years continued to make advancements and improvements to the oiling system, which, as you're all probably pretty aware, none of really which kept the oil in the engine. But hey, at least the parts were properly lubricated. And as a lot of you are aware, when it comes to an old Harley-Davidson, you don't have a problem unless that thing is not leaking oil. If it's not leaking oil on an older Harley, you've got a problem. Now, by 1955, the Panhead engine is up to around 60 horsepower. Now, 60 horsepower, that don't sound like squat today. But back in 1955, that was very respectable. I mean, Harley-Davidson was a real powerhouse back in that day, aside from the British bikes, but we ain't got time for that. Now, anyhow, with these 60 horsepower engines, Harley-Davidson actually came up with a little improvement here. The base gaskets on the engines, they actually went to a rubber-impregnated asbestos gasket. Can we even say asbestos anymore? Is that like an illegal word? But now here's where things get really interesting for the Panhead. They came out with some stronger cases, and also a much stronger bottom end for the Panhead engine. Harley-Davidson replaced the previously cylindrical roller bearings with a Timken tapered bearing bottom end. Where have we heard that before? And also an enlarged sprocket shaft. Now the crank pin and the sprocket shaft are now made out of 4620 steel, which is much stronger and also way more machinable. So you're going to get a higher quality of machining in these years of Panheads, granted with how old they are. They still got the period correct crank for that year. Now the intake manifold was upgraded with basically what we see today with an O-ring intake, and not only that, they upgraded that 6-bolt cake pan on the top to a 12-bolt to basically try to stop the oil leaking from the top of the engine. Did it work? Depends who you talk to. Now by 1958, Harley-Davidson's upgraded to another iteration of the Victory Cam, and they've also polished the intake ports, which are netting you about a 12% increase in power on that 60 horsepower. So, not much, but you are getting more. And not only that, they increased the cooling fin depth by up to an inch. Now the valve guide seals, they're now alloy steel instead of bronze, and now we also got a larger diameter pinion shaft. Now here's the best part about these upgrades. The inner cam bearings actually became a full complement Torrington bearing for that inner cam bearing. Now where have we heard you need to convert to a Torrington bearing before? Now by 1965, the Panhead's pumping out about 65 horsepower, no pun intended, but they did increase the compression and they did a reiteration of the Victory camshaft. But now with a larger, heavier crankshaft and a few stupid little things that we take for granted today, like electric start and basically front and rear suspension, these engines were getting a lot heavier. They weighed about 75 pounds more than they originally did, which was really leading to Harley-Davidson needing to come up with a new engine. And if you guys have been around Harley a while, you pretty much know came after the Panhead. Now, at this tail end of the Panhead's production, this is where Harley-Davidson kind of started to fall on hard times. They needed a new engine, and they really needed a way to kind of finance the R&D to get this done and actually put it into production. Guys, Harley-Davidson's Panhead engine, it is a very highly sought-after motor these days, and anymore, there is very few people that have actually ever really had their hands on one. I've only seen them. I've seen other people take them apart, but myself, I haven't personally got to get my hands on one, which I would love to. They are absolutely a legendary motor. And this is basically what the Shovelhead was born out of. The Shovelhead, the original Shovelhead, was pretty much no more than a Panhead with a good set of heads on it and a few little minute tweaks there and a little larger bore. But guys, my hat is absolutely off to you if you own a Panhead today, and not only if you just own one, if you're still able to ride it. I know a lot of those engines ended up in choppers and a lot of custom projects, but if you still have an original Harley-Davidson motorcycle, or mostly original, let's just say if the engine's still in the same bike it was manufactured with, my hat is off to you, you were doing great. So guys, even if you still have a Panhead today, you are probably well aware that you can still get performance parts and a lot of reproduction parts for those engines. Panhead went out of production in the late 60s, and like I say, it is still a reliable engine today. Guys, the Panhead engine really left a legacy for Harley-Davidson, and a lot of that engine's DNA carried forward, especially where we really saw it come to light was in the Evo engine. Now, not even in the Evo engine, yes, we got a big departure from all that when it came to the twin cam, but they came back to it with the Milwaukee 8. Yeah, we don't have the Timken bottom ends, but we still have the single cam design and the aluminum heads, but that's really about it that lives on for the Panhead and the Milwaukee 8. So guys, I had a lot of requests to do a video on the Panhead engine, and it's no surprise with Harley-Davidson that the Panhead engine, you can still get parts for this thing today. Maybe not from Harley-Davidson directly. You might get some new old stock from a dealer that's been around for a while, but there are more than enough reproduction parts out there that are super high quality if you're trying to put together a Panhead. And not only that, you can still get basically a reproduction Panhead crate engine today. So guys, as I mentioned, I had a lot of requests for the Panhead, and I'm so happy to finally get that video out for you guys. If you guys enjoyed it, please don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. But until next week, guys, You stay safe on the streets, ride smart, dodge those cars, and I'll catch you guys back here next Friday with a brand new video. Thanks for watching.